Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Glad Trad podcast. My name is Jordan Pacheco.
And I'm Rodolfo Carlos.
I feel like it's been forever, Rudy, since we've just like sat down and let our hair back, and just talked about like a myriad of topics. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of life going on.
It's a lot of life going. Let's start with yours because yours is far more interesting than mine. What have you been up to? How is your lovely wife and your unborn daughter?
Well, Ashley's fine. And yesterday we had our 20-week ultrasound. So we got to see our little baby, which I don't know if I've told everyone yet, but we it's kind of a funny story. One day we were deciding, okay, well, we found out it was a girl, and then we're like, okay, well, what kind of girl names do we want? Because we have a ton of boy names, but not a lot of girl names. And so we were going through all the names and stuff, and I think we were sticking to Bridget, but it ended up being that one day we were talking about our total consecration to Mary, and we thought that if we have given everything to Mary, then why shouldn't we give our firstborn daughter to her? So we named her Maria. And so one day I went to Mass and I came home and I said, Ashley, I hope you don't mind, but I kind of already told Jesus that I'm going to give my daughter the name Maria.
Probably should have.
So we kind of have to commit now.
Not that she would have minded, like, okay, but probably a good thing to talk to your wife about. For Jen would probably crucify me.
So we named her Maria.
Maria.
We saw her yesterday.
Yeah,
she's doing really well. It's really amazing. Really, people tell you they go to an ultrasound and stuff, and they show you the pictures, but to actually be in the room and be a fly on the wall and see what the technician's doing, and it's really a crazy technology. Like we were able to see her heart. Her heart was beating really nicely, and her spine is formed like really perfectly, and we saw a little bit of her forehead. Ashley thinks she has a big forehead like mine.
I love that. I love that's the takeaway. Oh, that's funny. All babies have big foreheads, by the way. Because they all kind of look like aliens when they're formed, especially.
Yeah. So that's what's going on. I'm also just kind of like wrapping up my dad's estate.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Yeah. What about you?
Well, I want to real quick note that I was listening to some of our older podcasts, and it wasn't that long ago, really, because we were doing our quarantine stuff only a year ago. But it's funny listening to before y'all were married podcasts, because we're both talking about our fiancés and all this other kind of stuff, and then now. You're on the cusp of fatherhood. At 20 weeks old, that means you have how many weeks do you guys have left?
I think that's 20 weeks is like halfway. So
yeah.
I think another 4 months and change.
Man, I'm so happy for you guys. I'm almost disgustingly happy for you guys. I'm like, this happiness is No, but that's great. I can't wait for the day that I can kind of join you in the rank. For the record, Jen and I have the reverse problem. We have a ton of girl names, but after our first 2 boy names, they kind of start piddling out into the ether. So
I figured you would name your firstborn Leo or something like that.
That's funny that you say that. Okay, so So since you told me the name of your daughter, I'll tell you what name we always say for our firstborn son is Ambrose.
Ambrose.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So we have Ambrose, and then we have some daughter names. But are you weird with like when people, like when you ask people are like, well, what's the name of your baby? And people are like, oh, I don't want to tell you, otherwise you'll steal it. Are you one of those people who's weird with that? Or
No.
I knew you wouldn't be. But I have some coworkers whose wives are expecting, and naturally we're like, hey, what are you gonna name your kid? Oh, can't say it. I'm like, why? That's stupid.
Yeah, I mean,
like, I'm gonna steal it, really? Think a little higher of me, please.
It's kind of weird.
Oh, so they mean, well, I know. Well, life's been well over here. It's going to be an extremely green spring and summer. The reason why is because it's been so rainy and snowy here in Colorado, which is nice, which is what we need. But it's been really, really good. Just working business as usual. There's not much excitement to record. Oh, well, of course, the biggest excitement naturally is that Jen and I are officially beyond 90-day fiancés. So we're now on day, as we record this, it's like day 87 or something like that. And I am so freaking done. I feel sorry for our listeners and I'm sorry for like our friends because I keep saying this, but I'm so serious. People, if you are engaged, don't do a long engagement. Don't do it. Don't let anything stop your plans. I'm so grateful that Jen and I had the time to grow together, and during the whole of last year's pandemic, especially early on, it was an extremely trying time for our relationship. Like I think we went through a really serious hurdle that usually married couples would go through. Ours just relationally growing. I think that we had that a little early. So for us, I think pushing it back was a good idea. We just got to grow stronger, but push it back to summer. I'm deadbeat done, dude. Like I can't wait to be married. Just now, I had to send her home right before we started this podcast, and I'm like, I can't wait for the day. I'm just like, go in the other room, and I'll see you in a second.
Honey, I'm home.
Honey, I'm home. I got some bratwurst from the butcher shop in King Supers today, and it was like bacon cheddar bratwurst. It was very very good.
That sounds good.
It's very, very nice. Which reminds me, I wanted to tell you this, and maybe this is going to scandalize some of our people, but I know it's not going to because everyone's really hardcore.
What are you gonna say? Segue from bratwurst to
Yeah, right.
scandal.
Well,
What are you gonna say?
when's the last time you think I've worn a mask inside a store, like a grocery store? What would you figure?
Well, Colorado's pretty lax, and when I went to go visit you, it seemed like not a lot of people were wearing masks, but then little pockets were.
Yeah,
I'm gonna guess like 3 months ago.
maybe longer than that. At this point, it feels like.
Amazing. I'm
I
jealous.
It depends on where you're at. In Southern Colorado, it's more conservative, right? And at this point, so many people have kind of woken up to the scamdemic. Oh no, did I say that out loud? That I just got done with it. I was like, I perceived something, and I'm like, most people don't care because most people know. Like in your back of your heads, most people know that at this point, this is all mind control BS, right? Let's just call it what we see it. And I'm sure we're going to get to talking about it in the church because Lord knows that's still obviously persisting. Um, but yeah, I just said one day I remember like I was like, man, for the sake of my mental health, I just can't wear this thing. I'll do it for like the whole 5 seconds it takes to walk to a restaurant, and then you sit down, you take it off, and apparently that's like you've paid your tribute to the gods. So there you go.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
safe.
Yeah, apparently you're safe. But no one stopped me. No one's accosted me. Now that I've said that, I'm sure I'm going to get stopped and accosted. But I've decided I'm just done, dude. I'm tired, and I feel so sorry for
Good.
you and the fellows back in California because at least here it feels like there's a little bit more of a number that's willing to kind of just be done with it. I think it's a rural nature of some parts of Southern Colorado here, or I guess I'm technically Central South Colorado.
That's what's so alluring. I mean, there's like a big a siren call of moving out of California, going out into rural areas like Texas or certain parts of Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are talking about Idaho, and we just have some friends that are trying to finalize things in Georgia.
Right.
And I feel bad, because the parish is losing families because
Mm.
they're moving away out of here. But man, just it's so hard to live here. It's so hard. I mean, I know a guy at his work. They make them wear jumpsuits, and they're just like white jumpsuits.
Like ET
And
style.
supposedly that's supposed to stop the spread or something like that. But I mean, it's just like I'm sure he feels like a prison inmate. He was
Right.
telling me he doesn't wear it. So
Well, good because he shouldn't. And I'm very fortunate because where I work, we're not required to wear it, and we haven't for it seems like a hot second ever since I've worked there, right? So,
well,
um,
just think about it for a sec, right? I mean, the mask in a way sort of makes sense, but if you actually look at the data, it doesn't really do much. But think about a jumpsuit, right?
mm-hmm,
How is a virus spread? Well, primarily it's spread by your nose and your mouth, and most likely from a sneeze or a cough, or maybe if you're projecting your voice, um, you might be spreading more germs than normal.
mm-hmm.
Now, how is a jumpsuit preventing that from happening? It isn't.
It isn't.
A jumpsuit you're wearing because you want some false sense of security. You're thinking, oh, if I put this on, I'm going to be safer.
Right.
But it doesn't do anything other than well, number one, it reinforces a bad habit, namely to think that putting on this magic jumpsuit is going to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, it's making it so that you're like a prison inmate at
Yeah.
your job.
Yeah.
It's so strange. It's very
Well,
strange.
this is, I mean, this is all pure control. And one thing that's interesting is I call it the weird, it's not a consistent religion is what I say. The
Yeah.
the Wu flu adherence. And this is why. So you can wear a cloth mask. Actually, not even a cloth mask. You can wear something that looks like a mask, right? Like I have a
Like a
gator.
gator,
Yeah,
a
I
neck
wear a
gaiter
gaiter
thing.
because
Yeah.
I'm like, if I'm going to wear this, if I'm going to wear the stupid thing at places like the stupid gym or whatever, if I pull it down and breathe, I'm like, at least I want myself to be warm. And so
Dude, the gym. I miss going to the gym with you, bro.
I miss going to the gym with you too, bro. Honestly, I miss any bro going to the gym with.
We
I've
were
been,
just about to make gains.
I know Jen's my fit chick partner now, and she's really leaned into it. So it's actually kind of cool. But
That's awesome.
yeah, but it's not, going with the fiance isn't always the same as going with your bro. I think there's just a different ritualism there,
Right. Yeah.
Not
Push
saying
yourselves differently.
right, not to say anything bad about going with my wife. I think that's, or my wife to
Oh
be.
no.
I think that's a good thing. But
Yeah.
no, but it's funny because you see this thing where it's like, okay, if I put on the mask, I'm immune, and any statistics, any Tom Woods has such a good breakdown of this, such a good breakdown because first off, mask mandates don't work. Texas led the way, right? They dropped the mask mandate. Places, other states like Florida wouldn't even
Florida,
like
yeah.
really have them. And then what do you see? Well, it turns out California's is like this, Florida's is lower in infection rates. What does this prove? At the very least, that these trust the science experts, and there were no experts, remember, back in early January of last year, but suddenly they popped up everywhere. All it proves is it's kind of BS. And then you find out that if I walk into a restaurant, I have to have it on. Oh my gosh, I have to have it on until you go to your table and you sit down and you take it off. In which case, your waiter will literally be a foot from you, like a waiter ought to be. But it's okay because you pinched your incense to Caesar, and now the gods will protect you. And then for people wearing those like those N95 or the hospital surgical masks, right? In surgeries, those are supposed to be changed out every 2 hours. Otherwise, they get unsanitary. So the same person keeps it in their car, breathes it in and day out, whatever. And so I'm sure that the amount of issues that's going to be from that is important. And then I just keep thinking about the psychological issues. Like there's an entire generation of children which are being trained right now that going out in public, you have to have your mask. And that's the thing that pisses me off beyond all end is like, you're in the grocery store and these like little kids have their dumb little masks and you're just like, oh my gosh, like
You shouldn't be wearing it.
you should be wearing it. And but they're magically exempt, by the way. And it turns out the schools aren't these hot spots. And this is the last thing I'll say. Public school buses are still running, of course. I found out from my nephew that they just have assigned seating, but I was like, well, that can't be socially distanced because they aren't kicking any kids off the bus. So this social distance kind of myth doesn't make sense for the grocery store, but apparently it's supposed to now make sense for church still in some parts of the country and all that kind of crap. And so I'm sorry, but I think that anybody who is still going along with this, anybody who's still going along with this in the name of safety and is putting aside their duties to their fellow citizens, as well as certainly to the duty in the church, I'm sure we'll talk about. It's beyond ridiculous. I think it's actually criminal, to be honest with you. I think the amount of damage that we've reaped from this thing has been criminal.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's really sad out here. I mean, I think about, I went to visit you in Colorado. When was that? That
That
was
was
like
January, wasn't it? Over New
it was
Year's?
like
Yeah.
January, late January. Or
Yeah.
no. Was it?
No, it was New Year's, wasn't it?
It was New Year.
I feel like we did a Tay Dam together.
I can't remember. It was around that time.
Yeah.
But that was the first time that I'd been inside of a church in a very long time where people were just kind of, being normal and
Yeah.
it's cool. Here in California, that's the most normal thing that I have right now, just to be able to go to mass. And a lot of people don't wear the mask, and that's fine. I don't think you should be wearing it unless, I don't know, you're an old person and you feel safe doing it or something. I don't know. I mean, even still, I don't think it really does much. But anyway, I'm thinking about Colorado because here we still have so many restrictions, and we're still even in the tent, and part of it is because the church is so big now that we don't fit into our tiny chapel, but at the same time there's still a lot of adherence to these mandates that are being trickled down from the archbishop, and it's really wearing me out, man.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people are feeling this too.
Yeah.
And there's some people who think of it as like they have to suffer through this, and it's like, do you? I mean, do you really have to, or is this just something that that's imposed on you? I don't know. I guess you could offer it up.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked, and it's so funny because this is almost like the anniversary of our limits of obedience we talked about
Mhm.
last year, remember? Because we were in lockdown.
Yeah.
And we started these videos apart from each other. And again, we're a year out, we're a year onward. And I want to real quick say that as much as I love Our Lady Mount Carmel, as much as I'm extremely grateful to Archbishop Aquila for allowing the fraternity and letting churches do their thing. That's not the case for every church. The vast majority of churches out here still have a sign-up sheet and mask mandates and all that kind of crap at varying degrees. Carmel is on the proper end of the spectrum, which is like wide open, come in, be a normal Catholic again. But I
Yeah.
mean the amount of damage that's going to be done across even Colorado, because Colorado's not a red state, right? It's a purple state that's going blue, and
Mhm.
and as far as our Catholicism goes, Archbishop Gomez was our bishop here at one point. I have to be very careful how I describe His Excellency, but it's a different place. Colorado's a different place than California. You would never get like the Religious Education Congress here in Colorado. The center
No,
tends to
makes sense.
be. I think that, especially after the changes, I find that the coast got the worst of it. You have New York, Boston, Los Angeles. Like some of these places are the freaking Wild West. But here in the actual Wild West, I think there's a little bit more orthodoxy, if you will, retained in Colorado and in Nebraska and Kansas and all these other kinds of places. I think it's a clearer air, personally. So I wish that it was a case that Archbishop Aquila would just come out tomorrow and be like, do what you want to do. I suspect that if a priest asks for that, he'd probably grant it, because I don't think that he would place favorites, especially with the fraternity. I've met him before, and I find he has a very deep devotion to God and wants to do the right thing. And so it's a tiptoeing around the state. But when it comes to Los Angeles, the more I think about it, the more I think about just how hard it is. And I've met out here Catholics who are so frustrated that they don't want to be in the church anymore, right? I've met Catholics who haven't gone to confession in a year. And then you extrapolate that into California, where there wasn't even a fight in some places. And I feel for all of us, especially all of us at St. Vitus and other places, because we're just trying to do what we as Catholics are supposed to do, which is to say that our souls and our temporal life here is our souls are more important than our temporal life here. We are dust, and unto dust we shall return. The sacraments are necessary for salvation. They are necessary for our spiritual strength, our mental strength. The Mass is the most important thing. And then you get these mandates from on high that essentially tell you the opposite, that you can have a dispensation, that you don't need the sacraments, that you need to obey, 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 obey. And I think it was good when Charles Cologne talked about how we're getting a taste of what they went through at the time of the changes. This kind of genuine clericalism where it's like, oh no, you need to obey, little one. You don't know any
Mhm.
better. You'll kill grandma. We know what's best for you. When the hemorrhage in the church is so real right now, and these men sit there and they don't do anything. Not even a word of spiritual encouragement in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it's really wild, man. I mean, going through it from even the perspective of my father not being able to have the sacraments,
Oh
like
yeah.
that really, really, I mean, that sort of experience really changes you. Um, and I'm sort of trying to deal with that, deal with that sort of resentment that I have of
Mm,
not only, I have to be careful. I mean, I do have some resentment to the Archbishop. I'll have to be honest.
yeah.
That's something that I have to work through, but not only to the Archbishop, but also to to a Catholic hospital, like these Catholic institutions that you place so much trust in,
Yeah.
they just sort of turn their back on you, in a moment where you need them the most. And so I understand where some of those people that you mentioned are coming from, but I would never advise them to leave despite all of this
Yeah.
craziness that's going on. I mean,
Well, a
there
lot
is one
of
bark,
and a lot
just
of
one bark.
a lot of what we're doing in here is I'm trying to tell people, like, first off, to anybody who's wavering, I know that you're out there. This podcast is your friend. We're not the kind of guys who are going to be like, oh well, just obviously the answer is to stay in the Catholic Church. This is the one true faith. In these terrible times where we see the will of weak men governing the church and the will of laity who haven't held the supernatural faith, all the more to realize that this is the one true faith, because we can clearly see that the smoke of Satan has entered the church. And why would Satan waste so much time and energy on something that's not the truth?
Yeah.
So hold fast to the traditions you've been taught, whether through the written word or through the oral method. Hold fast.
Paul.
This is a good lesson of how a lot of our ancestors were, where sometimes they wouldn't have the mass for years. Think about the Japanese citizens who had to stay at the time of the shoguns, and they wouldn't see a priest for generations sometimes.
Yeah.
Now it's a little bit more bitter because for our entire life we were taught that the sacraments are the most important thing, and that priests are these heroic peoples who will witness and administer, and your bishop is owed your loyalty and your fealty because they will always come through for you with this sort of thing. And now we have evidence that many of these people don't have the supernatural faith, or that their faith is not as strong as they need to be. As Catholics, what's very funny is that we read the lives of St. Athanasius and St. Nicholas and St. Thomas More and St. Catherine of Siena and all these heroic witnesses to faith, St. John Paul II, right, the fall of communism, and we say, these are all the examples of the faith that we need to strive for. And then in our great moment, we feel like we've been deserted a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that, we want to walk beside you. And so for the people that I've been talking to, Rudy, they didn't really go or know that the traditional Latin Mass existed. They had their reservations, all the quintessential, I don't want to, the traditional Latin Mass is weird, that kind of thing. And I was like, this is the last stop before somebody leaves the faith. And so Jenna and I have had two friends in particular who they came with us 2 weeks ago. And then they actually came a second time without us knowing last week. So I'm just praying that this is a provider, and also just a great realization that there are heroic priests out there who are willing to administer the sacraments no matter what. And I'm praying for you, dude, because I know that, Christ calls us to forgive. I think that forgiveness is a process. And I think that we're all trying to do is we're trying to work up to where it's easier and easier to forgive. But I think about that all the time. The fact that I find that a Catholic hospital, which is supposed to hold the tenets of the faith, I don't think they did right by you at all. I don't think that them and the hospital chaplain did right by your father, offering up a spiritual, what was it called? A spiritual anointing of the sick or something.
Yeah.
And one of my work projects right now is we're going through the sacrament of anointing of the sick. So I can tell you that now that I know the legalese of how the sacrament works, it really does make my blood boil. But in these kind of moments also, I really have to remember that God's grace and his mercy and his judgment and everything is bigger than the sacraments. It's bigger than human error. And so what's so funny is that what we're seeing on display is just so much human error right now. And so God's providence recognizes that. He takes that into account too. I think when Christ comes back, when he comes back, he's going to whack a couple of skulls over this one, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. The sacraments are our primary vehicle to grace. That's the way that our Lord designed them to be for us, and gave them for us to use them. And obviously there's ways to, there's a perfect act of contrition and that sort of thing. I'm just afraid, I'm afraid for my father's soul. And I still remember the last day that I spoke to him, and
Mm-hmm.
I promised him that I would pray for him for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
As long as I have breath, I'm going to keep praying for him, because I'm still afraid for him. You see, people have, and this is a sad thing about my family, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers can sympathize with this, maybe from their own experience with their families too, is that we have so many opportunities in our life to not only to correct ourselves from mortal sin, or to return to the church and to like live out our Catholic faith every single day, not just go to mass once a year. We have all of these different opportunities for us to grow in holiness. And many of the times we find ourselves in situations where it's too late. Like, the hour and the day that God calls you home is only known to God, and you're never going to know that day. And so you have to strive as hard as you can every single day to make that day worthwhile and to perfect yourself, just if only a little bit, right?
Mm.
But I'm afraid for him because it came so fast, and then there was all these other external circumstances that weren't available to him. So it's just, if there's anything that I could say, I don't know if my family even listens to this anymore, but this is why so many of our viewers, this is why I'm the way that I am with our family. It's like, look, this is literally the most important thing that I can ever tell you. Like, your soul is worth more than anything in the universe.
Yeah.
And if you're not in the state of grace and that hour comes, it's not going to look good. It's not going to be fun, not only for yourself, but for the people around you. It's just horrible. It's a
Yeah.
horrible situation. And yeah, it's been wearing me down, but obviously, yeah, there's so much hope, and my hope and my trust is in God.
Mm-hmm.
And in moments like this, what else can you do? I mean, you can't put your hope and your trust in anything here in the world,
Right.
because it's not enough.
I think that this is one of the things that is one of the very positive things I think traditional Catholics ought to do well to recapture. Because I think that we're fighting one war where we're trying so hard to go by the letter of the law, because the letter of the law has been kind of thrown away to the wind, and it's to the
Mm-hmm.
first law of the church is the salvation of souls. It's not just a nice little community organizer. It's not pancake breakfast on Sundays. It's not even just to do a thorn in the side of the government. The first law of the church is the salvation of souls. And if we do not have that kind of zeal, we will never have the evangelical uh, cultivation that so many people pretend that we're having right now. It is important that we tell our family, that we tell our friends, that we tell our neighbors, that we tell those we love so much that God so loves them so radically, mystically, so intensely, so passionately, that all he wants to do is draw them into himself. John 3:16, right? God so loved the world, he sent his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him will never die, but have eternal life. The book of John later goes on to say that, look, Christ didn't come to condemn the world, but he came to save it. And I think about this all the time because, again, with friends like mine who some of them are teetering on the edge of the faith, and you just want to hold them and say, if you realize just how incredible, how desirous God is for you and what we need to do, then they wouldn't hesitate for a second if you could somehow give them a glimpse. And so on the other flip side, for traditional Catholics, the challenge for us is always to have the reason for our hope, right? It is to recognize, listen, you don't have to believe like, dare we hope all men be saved. You don't have to believe that. And you don't also have to believe that there's this like double predestination, total depravity, Calvinist sort of thing. That
Right.
there are these reasonable hopes and that we trust in God's mercy as well as God's justice. And the point of the Catholicism is not to speculate on where your soul will be after you die. Any good Catholic, any man even, knows what his road is leading to. we'll lie, we'll say things to ourselves. We all know. We know when we're in a state of grace. We know when we've mortally sinned. We know when we've venially sinned. We know when we willfully mortally sinned or venially sinned or something. I mean, these are little notches in the back of the brain. And so I think that the fact that in your last conversation to your dad, that you told him that you would pray for him, you know, it might not have sank in then. There's a possibility that it could have sank in at the end. There's a possibility that your father, as he was slipping into unconsciousness, was crying out to the Lord. And it's possible that God heard him and said, okay, well, it turns out that the priest is going to be derelict in his duty in this instance. So I'm going to have to step in. Is it a guarantee? I don't know. Looks like you and I are going to have to work really hard to get to heaven and find out, you know? But at the very least, you know, I'll keep your father in my prayers too, because if there's any chance whatsoever that he's in purgatory or anything, you know, then our prayers will be meritorious to his salvation. And in the event that he's not, it doesn't hurt that the fact that we were thinking of somebody else to do these sorts of things.
Yeah.
What frustrates me, Rudy, honestly, and what is a line I'm really trying to walk, is the fact that I don't see this kind of language at large from the bishops as a whole. I don't see that kind of language at large through this whole pandemic. The words of comfort to the laity are just not there. It's business as usual for so many of these people. And in fact, you know, not to be so grim this episode, but it's true. It's like there's a part of me who's just like, wow. Christ asks, when the Son of Man comes back to the world, will he find faith upon the earth? And you're like, you read that when things are good, and you're like, I don't know what that freaking means. Churches are doing this and everything's good. And now you're like, holy crap. I kind of see what our Lord was talking about. Because
it's like the writings on the wall now. You know? So certain things stand out and you're like, whoa. Just like that. I've been thinking about that a lot too, because you know, you mentioned that the other day in the chat, and I was like, that's true.
Yeah.
There's a very small remnant here. But the good thing is that this remnant still has a very much, still has a great love for Christ.
Oh, yeah.
A fervor that you seldom see anymore. And that little remnant is going to take over the world. There's a lot of people getting married, and you know, a couple people that we know, I won't say who they are because I don't know if it's public, but you know, they found out that they were pregnant, and I was like, wow, you know. And then I look at my daughter on the ultrasound and I say, God is renewing his church. Yeah. He's renewing the family life, not only for me and Ashley, because our lives are radically different from our upbringing. But he's bringing other people to do the same thing, to sanctify their lives through their marriages, through their work. Like, for example, for you, like you're using all of your God-given talents at a amazing Catholic company. Like, God is renewing. And it's hard to see that sometimes because of all the distractions and all the, you know, the crazy stuff that's going on outside. But God is working through all of this. It's really true. And yeah, and I mean, this isn't a grim episode by any means, because that's our hope. Our hope is in Christ.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that one of the things is, it's what a roller coaster of a time to be alive.
Yeah.
I mean, I close my eyes all the time because, for instance, you know this. I think you're in it too, just by the virtue of restoration. But I'm in such a cultus for Leo the 13th and Fulton J. Sheen and some of these juggernauts, right? these saints who aren't technically saints.
Right.
Real quick, I just want to mention that in the 33 Days to Consecration of Saint Joseph book, I was flipping through the artwork at the very back, and there's a heavenly court all around Saint Joseph and the Virgin Mary and the Christ. And Leo the 13th is over here on the left hand side, and I'm scrolling through, and he's like the only one who doesn't have Saint by his name, but everybody
Nobody
knows.
knows.
Everybody knows. But what I was gonna say is, there's these romantic glimpses that we get where we're like, I wonder what it'd be like to be in this time, as a Catholic in this time. What if I was at Lepanto? What if I was at the siege of Vienna? What if I was sipping tea while Leo the 13th was waving to the camera for the first time in history? But God places us. I firmly believe that God places us here in our particular time for that particular purpose of building the church at this time, you know? That there is no other time in history God has designated for us. And even as traditional Catholics, you know, one sobering and one really actually, I think it's a very liberating thought, is that we're often accused of believing that there was an in the garden time. If only we could return back to 1950. If only we could turn back to 1890. If only we could return back to, I don't know, what's a good year? 1615 or something. Oh, everything would be perfect. Well, that's stupid. Because suppose we lived in the 50s, right? We would have seen Fulton J. Sheen, sure, but the wolves were at the door in the church and it wouldn't have been exposed. And suppose we lived in the 1890s, but modernism was everywhere. G.K. Chesterton writes about this, and it's the advent of World War I. No. Better to live in this time because we have the means of communication now. We have the history of the church behind us. And also, there's so much goodness in the world still to cultivate and to fight for. A lot of what we're doing, a lot of what this feels like, I think, is if you read Lord of the Rings again. And that book deals so heavily, so extreme with the forces of good and evil. And there are plenty of times when it seems like the forces of evil are going to override everything good. I'll switch to the movie for a second, right? But there's a moment in the Siege of Gondor. This happens in the book too, of course, but I think if you haven't read the book, this might be just each of visual, but Pippin and Gandalf are kind of sitting in the Siege of Gondor has been happening and they're defeated. You know, I mean, they're barricading the last of the doors. There's a cave troll on the other side. They're trying to bust in. And, you know, Pippin kind of muses that this must be the end of all things and this must be the end of hope, right? And Gandalf kind of rebukes him a little bit and more or less tells him that, you know, there's always hope. There's hope for Frodo and Sam to throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. And it's a really, you know, when you watch it first time, you're like, well, it makes you feel nice and tingly inside, right? Before you realize that the battle is still actually to be fought. They still have to break the siege of Gondor. They still have to go to the Black Gate and hold off the legions of Sauron just enough for Frodo and Sam to have a tiny little sliver of a chance. But that chance still exists, which is interesting for me to think about. And so I'm excited by the fact that our children, for the first time since our grandparents, are going to be raised joyously in the Latin Rite. I'm excited that the fact that the battles that you and I are fighting right now, and so many of our friends and so many of our families are fighting now, God willing, our children won't have to see. Demographics don't lie on these sorts of cases. Zealotry does not lie in these kind of cases. Our Lady doesn't lie in these instances. And I think that we're in for a wild ride through our lifetime. I think that we're seeing the death of a lot of systems which everyone thought would last forever. And that includes things from, I don't know, from our country down to the new order, right? Literally the new order of things. But I think that it's all kind of thrashing so heavily because it's all coming to an end, right? I think that some of these people know in the back of their heads that things are not going to be this way in 10, 20, 30 years. And so they're terrified about it because they're holding on to little vestiges of power that they can.
Yeah, it's like the last little tantrum, you know.
Break all the toys on the way out.
Speaking of books, are you reading anything right now?
That is a great question, Rudy. And the answer is I am. Here, permit me to grab some stuff. And I want to see yours because I know you're reading some stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Whew. I got a lot, so let's see. I mean, you know me. So, okay. So I found these two. So I'm reading a couple things. So first off, my religious reading for Lent, Rudy, I think you're doing it too, but this Consecration of St. Joseph by Father Donald Calloway, this is awesome. This has been by far my favorite Lenten read of my life ever. And Saint Joseph has vastly become one of my patron saints. I think if you are a husband and a father, it's almost stereotypical, right? Because you hear like, oh, Saint Joseph, Saint Joseph. No, Saint Joseph is such a good dude, and especially in regards, he's patriarch of patriarchs, head of the Holy Family, guardian of virgins, terror of demons, naturally. But to every guy listening out here, I can 100% tell you. I wish I could reinsert this into my hard truth about pornography video. Saint Joseph has been the greatest intercessor for chastity. I mean, it's almost uncanny how, as I get closer to my marriage, I've heard that like you got to be careful because the devil will. This is like the last vestige. The devil hates the idea of a sacrament, so he'll use everything he can to attack you, everything he can. And I've been kind of like really worried about that, right? Because I don't want to like slip up. And Saint Joseph has swooped in at like the right era, and I'm really it's incredible how clear so many things are. So that's been great. I am also on the secular side, on my military history side. I'm reading Last Stand, which is of course about famous last stands in the modern era. I'm reading about the Battle of Iswandawala and Rorke's Drift, which was in the latter 1800s, the British Empire against the Zulu Nation. But I recently got done with Custer's Last Stand in 1876. There was the Alamo, that was 1836, I think. So anyway, it's fun. People die for causes. That's essentially or they die because they have no other choice. That's essentially what this book is. And then the last thing I want to say, I'm listening to it by audiobook, but it's called The 2,000-Year History of the Papacy by Father John O'Malley, Society of Jesus. He's a good Jesuit, as far as I can tell, if he's still alive. But it is literally just a series of, I think that case is 35 lectures going through the history of the papacy and highlighting particular popes. I have Charles Colombe's Vicars of Christ back here, and so it's kind of just like an audio lecture of that sort of thing where Charles goes through each of the popes. He goes through, Father O'Malley goes through most of a lot of popes, a lot of big popes and minor popes. But right now I just learned about this is Gregory the Seventh, Pope Gregory the Seventh, and Henry the Fourth, and something called the Road to Canossa. So what happened is that the emperor disapproved of the papal election of Gregory. So Gregory essentially, through some shenanigans and stuff, it's more than that. It's good old medieval historical politicking. Gregory excommunicates the Pope, and the Pope has to beg for forgiveness. So he walks to Canossa, which is in the Italian Alps, and begs for forgiveness barefoot in front of like wherever the Pope is being housed or something. But that's not what ends it. In fact, it begins it. So
Wait, the emperor gets excommunicated?
Yeah, the emperor gets excommunicated. And so what happens is, so check it, the emperor gets excommunicated. He tries to make amends with the Pope. I think they make amends, but it doesn't last very long. And so what ends up happening is that the emperor sacks Rome. And this is in like the 10, this is in the year like 1000. This is in the 11th century, right before the Crusades, like 50 years before the Crusades. So this is a big deal. A Christian army sacking Rome. And they drive out Gregory and they instill an anti-pope. I don't want to say it's Clement III. I'm sorry to Clement III. Or Nicholas. Is it Nicholas II? No. I'm getting my popes confused, you can tell. But they install an anti-pope. And so it's just a whole thing, dude. I've learned so much about the papacy. So we might have things bad now. And I think that they're uniquely bad because we've had some scandal. Oh my gosh.
No, yeah. Going back to what you said earlier, I mean, you're born into one specific time period.
Yeah.
And those people at that time period, man, they had to suffer through that. That's crazy.
Yeah. What about you, dude? What are you reading?
Right now I'm reading I Accuse the Council.
Of course you are. By who?
Bishop Lefebvre.
Oh my gosh.
Bishop Lefebvre.
You're such a mad trad.
It's a really interesting book.
You're so self-devouring, Rudy.
It's just a book of this is what we did today in the council, this is what was discussed, and then this is what I said or what this person said. It's really interesting just to kind of get like an inner perspective of what was going on the council. I was reading that consecration book, but I think Ash and I had to put it down for a bit because I don't know, we're not really vibing with the writing style, but I would say that it's written for a particular group of people, and I think it's really good. Well, it's the first book of its kind, really.
Mm.
So there's some really interesting information in there. I don't want to discourage people from picking it up
Or I'd
and
highly
trying.
recommend it. I get that it's not for
Yeah,
everybody. This is my first consecration as well. But like I'm freaking like I'm getting my mind blown left and right, honestly.
hmm
But also I get my
but
mind blown left and right by like church histories and stuff. So you know who the heck
yeah, I know
you
you like
are.
history a lot. Well, the other day we were talking on the chat, and you were saying that you were reading something like, I think it was that Last Stand book,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, you know what? I haven't done any like recreational reading in a long time. Maybe I'll do that next. Maybe it'll be Lord of the Rings. I'll give that a shot.
Highly recommend, obviously, but that's not just because I'm a Catholic. It's because Lord of the Rings is a funny series too because I feel like the Fellowship of the Ring, like I feel like where he starts in the Fellowship, it's an upward like Fellowship's good, but it just goes up from there.
Yeah.
And they spend like half of Fellowship at the Council of Elrond, and I'm like, let's freaking go. It'll
Let's get
finally
out of
happen.
here.
Let's go. What's funny now, I will say this about the adaptation from Lord of the Rings, though, which is interesting. The Battle of Helm's Deep and the Battle of Minas Tirith, in terms of pages, aren't very long. They're very short snippets. Like Helm's Deep, I swear, is like 2 pages, and Minas Tirith might be like 4. So it's funny, like that. Such key parts of the book in these sorts of regards are relatively short in the book, but they're extrapolated so brilliantly in the films. And so,
Yeah.
you ever heard? Are you have you ever read Lord of the Rings?
I tried it. I think it must have been like in eighth grade or something, but it was just a little bit too much for my
Yeah.
eighth grade brain. So I had to put it down. And I
Well,
never tried after that. So
I just read it 2 years ago, so you'd think I would have read it sooner. I tried reading it multiple times in my life, but I just never. And here's the funny thing: my mom and my godfather, they love Lord of the Rings, the books. Um, and you know, it's funny because I watched the movies first, and I read the books, and they would sometimes tell me about like, oh, they missed this in the movie, and I was like, except for one kind of big change, which my godfather points out, which is like the nature of Frodo. I think which my godfather is very fair of. Frodo's more courageous in the books, and I think that's cool. I get why they kind of changed him a little bit in the movies, but in terms of like some of the changes they made, I think they're really, really good changes. And some of the characters that they omitted, obviously, you can't just cram it all into a movie. It's a whole different kind of medium. So, for those who kind of pretend that this war between the book and the movie are going on, I think Lord of the Rings is a perfect example of being able to love the books. I think that the books faithfully adapted are really the movies. I think the movies are just absolutely brilliant, the quintessential epic, and such a
mhm.
good example of good versus evil. And people need to stop the argument because it's so freaking awesome.
yeah.
But I
Yeah,
would. Mhm.
I don't I would say that Lord of the Rings is the best film that's ever been adapted from a book.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that's right. In terms of feel, tone, setting,
Yeah,
magnitude, yeah, I think you're completely right, dude. If you need to do some recreational reading, you could always try audiobooking.
that's true.
You know,
Yeah, I'm gonna see if Charles Colom's um
Star Spangled Crown.
Emperor Charles
Oh, Blessed Charles of Austria. Yeah,
Blessed
Charles
Charles,
of
yeah,
Austria.
Blessed
Yeah,
Charles book is on
yeah,
there, yeah.
that's right.
Because I'm interested in that. That seems interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the life of somebody going through all that. So that's
Where do you think here's a hot question? Do you think Texas will secede since we're talking about emperors and kings and stuff?
it's too soon to tell. I think the seed is there, but um, I don't know. The challenging thing that I would see about that is that what happens to the people in the cities? I mean, typically the cities are the most liberal areas. Will
Mm,
they go along with it? Will they abandon Texas? I don't know.
right.
And what does it look like? Well, if Texas goes, some other people will go too. So
Yeah.
what will it look like, getting imports or exports out and that sort of thing? Like, how would that look? I I'm for it.
Hmm.
I'm for it. I mean, I think it's just inevitable at this point.
Do you think we're in the end of the republic?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, balkanization is inevitable. I don't
Mm,
know if it'll be like a peaceful thing,
right.
but just the way that cities are the bastions of liberal ideas,
Sure.
and the coasts, they're like the empires of just bad stuff.
Hmm.
I wouldn't mind leaving here and going somewhere more idyllic.
I've always said it's ironic. So when it comes to our first civil war, of course, for extremely selfish reasons, I'm a staunch unionist. But I will say this: I think it's funny that a country like ours, forged in the blood of revolution, then has the difficulty of becoming a more tyrannical government than what we even supposed the British Empire was in 1776. And plot twist: I don't think King George III was particularly tyrannical at all. How is it that we're friends with Napoleon, but we think that George III is tyrannical? I don't understand, but that's a whole different conversation. I've been reading Texit's website religiously, just kind of seeing if it's just LARPing or if there's pragmatic. And there's a lot of method behind the madness, shall we say? So I'm all for it. Like I'm with you on balkanization. I don't know I don't know what America means necessarily because I found so many people who are so fundamentally anti it remotely. It's like the church, right? You find Catholics who hate the tradition of the church. They love the church insofar as they can change everything about the church. And I don't know how we reconcile that. I don't know, and I don't know if we should be honest with you. I don't think the virtue of staying together for patriotism makes any sense because I don't think patriotism's in the water certainly anymore. Um,
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Like, what is America anymore?
but like, can the question for any peoples is this: a peoples are their culture, right? So, what is American culture fundamentally? Can a socialist live next door to a capitalist, and them together create a system that's fair and equitable for both peoples? Can a Christian live next door to an atheist for a long amount of time and somehow create laws that are going to be fair for both worldviews?
No.
Can I don't think so. I used to think so. Maybe it works for a time is what happens, and thank God our country has had less bloodshed than it really should have, honestly.
Mhm.
But I keep thinking about I'm like, can California really live next to Texas? And they're both valuable. Like California imports energy from Texas. Texas is an energy exporter. Okay, so in other words, there are some states in the union which need other states more than other states. And that's
Right.
okay, right? Because we're supposed to have this great fabric of camaraderie among citizenship. But I got to tell you there are some ideas that I refuse I'm not I refuse to tolerate. I refuse to listen to. I think they're bad ideas.
Yeah.
Um what California has done with the lockdown is an example of this. I would never recommend that for anybody, nor their children. I would never tell Florida that it must go by the dictates of California. Um, I've heard a theory which essentially is that the Constitution's been dead for a hot second. We just cadaver sinted it, right? And I think that's true in politics, right? Like they impeached Trump twice for trumped up charges, and then each and every time we all sit here and we pretend, oh, we're such good Americans that we're trying to save the republic, oh, for the sake of our democracy. And I'm like, you people don't care about democracy. And
No.
democracy is not all it's trumped up to be. Aristotle talks about there are the three good forms of government, right? There's monarchy, there's aristocracy, and there's polity, which would be essentially government by the affected, might be the best example. So America was set up originally as kind of those three working together, right? You had we there was no direct election of senators. The only ones who could vote were property owners. Obviously, at the time, it was racially divided, but generally speaking, property owners, just like the Athenians did. And the president's powers, like the president had the same powers as the head of state that would usually be delegated between the king and the prime minister at another place. That's both inside the executive. And so the inverse of these three forms of government is monarchy turned bad gives way to tyranny, the worst form of government. Aristocracy gone bad turns to oligarchy, and polity turns bad turns to mob rule, mass democracy, essentially. in America, we're in a funny place because we've happened to get all three. Uh, I wish I was smart enough to say that this idea was purely mine, but I watched Charles Clem explain it the other day, of course, and I was like, oh, and that was his conclusion, and I was like, oh, that's completely apt. That
You got red pilled.
somehow we have the tyranny of the executive. We think about that with so many orders. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle it's coming from. We have the tyranny of the oligarchy. I mean, oh my gosh, the way that Congress acts, immune from their own laws, rules, and regulations. And then, of course, mass democracy, mob rule. The fact that two 18-year-old girls can vote you out of something just because they think it sounds cool. So.
Well, hey, I was thinking maybe we could try and read some of these comments that we've gotten over the past couple weeks.
Oh, yeah, dude, that's a great idea.
Matthew Reed says luminous ones are my favorite. This was on a video that I made on the luminous mysteries and whether or not we should pray them. And he says luminous mysteries are my favorite. Shows 3 sacraments and how they were formed. Yeah, that's a positive takeaway from the luminous mysteries for sure. Radical troll.
I'm sorry, is that all you have to say? Really?
About the luminous mysteries?
Yeah.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Okay, real quick. Can I just,
you shouldn't pray them. Just kidding.
I know, right? Well, the Fatima Center, Father Gruner was asked this, and he was like, look, we had this, and we had this back and forth too, remember? I think off the record, but we were like, all right, so the problem we have the luminous mysteries, problem is kind of a way too strong of a word.
Yeah.
There is the objective reason why the rosary is the 150 Psalms, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and all these other sorts of things. Right? And it goes through her particular witnesses to things. That's all true. Why would we change what the Virgin Mary herself has prescribed, right? And in fact, the reason I was wondering this, like, okay, well, we added the Fatima prayer because she asked us to add the Fatima prayer. So I think that, so what Father Gruner said is this: the luminous mysteries are awesome. They're not something that ought to be in the cycle just because the cycle is so set apart. But in and of themselves, the idea that they're less meritorious or that they're bad is not true either. I mean, and what's funny is we go through each of the mysteries, we're like, wow, these are all extraordinarily Catholic things. Like, it's nice to have institution of the Eucharist and all these other sorts of things. So, yeah, so in our regular rosary cycle, I don't really pray them. I don't have the kind of vendetta. I think we don't have the vendetta I think the other tribes have. Your video is brilliant on this. I think it's just such a nice, good way of explaining without, being a jerk.
Yeah.
But Matthew, yeah, dude, if you love the luminous mysteries, I would say you could consider them as we do the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. We pray the chaplet on rosary beads, but we would never say that the chaplet's in our rosary regimentation. The luminous mysteries are wonderful things to meditate on. Just use them as you would just on the outside of what might be your quintessential traditional rosary.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And John Paul II actually said that. I mean, he's very, very clear that, like, look, this is optional. This isn't like a requirement. So,
yeah, it's a devotional.
It's a devotional. Yeah. This is very true. Do what you want. Cool. Continue anyway. I was just like, I figured you had something.
Radical troll. Actually, to go back to that, this video was the one on the luminous mysteries was heavily based off of this book by Louis de Montfort, Saint Louis de Montfort, called The Secret of the Rosary. That's the other book I'm reading right now, and I really do recommend that book. It's an amazing book, really easy to read, and it really breaks through for people who haven't ever considered praying the rosary. It's just a lot of really good information on the history of it, the meaning of the prayers, what they can be. Really awesome book. I suggest that one. Radical Troll here, he says on this restoring of an heirloom missal, he says, is this some Catholic ASMR? It makes me relax. Thank you, Radical Troll. It is an ASMR video. And hope to make a couple more in the future.
Here is, this is going to be a fun name. This is O.L. Harold Bach Apostle, Heraldsbach Apostle. So I've butchered that. This is from 3 weeks ago. This is on our video, Why Young People Are Becoming Traditional. This was our January 7th show with Catholic Drive Time, which is just such a great pleasure to have to be on their show. That was awesome. And he says, the nearest Latin Mass church or traditional Latin Mass church near me had to add another Mass, and one further away had to have a sign up to meet demand. Yet our Novus Ordo churches are half empty. Can the hierarchy finally get it? Well, the answer is no, not yet, clearly, depending on which hierarchy we're talking about. There are some who think that because Latin Mass is just a tiny little fragment, it doesn't matter. And if you just look at data, this is going to be a whole different conversation in a decade. And so unfortunately, we're just going to play the waiting game. But if you, Heraldsbach Apostle, I'm very happy that to hear that how healthy your TLM is. And I'm sorry that it's so hard to get a seat in there. But keep the faith. You know, it's a positive thing. If a parish ain't growing, it's certainly shrinking, right?
Well, there's always a place for you to kneel.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, it's true. You just do. You know what's funny, Rudy? Pews are a Protestant invention. And if you look at the Orthodox churches, our old churches in Europe, of course, like you go to the Sistine Chapel or something, they don't have pews, and people be like, "Well, isn't this like a functioning church?" And the answer is yes, and the reason why they're a Protestant invention is this. So I was looking at the history. If the central point of worship is actually the sermon, right? And the sermon goes on for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Yeah,
you're gonna wanna, right? So meanwhile, if you're a Catholic, right, if the central part of worship is the Eucharist, and we spend our life standing and kneeling and all the ping-ponging around, right, then you don't necessarily need pews. You're always doing something. That's active participation for you.
Yup. RJC199 says on the Futurist Tradition, which is a follow-up episode we did 3 weeks ago, they say, look for the girl who is wearing one of those big medieval cone hats with a veil. Jordan had mentioned in that video that you should look out for a girl with a veil, with a little veil is what you said. And I said, no, you need the big veil.
Yo, I gotta tell you, I feel sorry for the pretty trad girl in Mass, because every guy is like trying to look at her, but I do think that God has been good in his judgment, because veils have such tunnel vision that you can't tell. Not that I've tried many veils on in my life, by the way. Just want to put that out there, but yeah, you can only focus on God there, which is really, really good. On the same video, I see a Ruben Martinez, who's actually been one of our longtime listeners and supporters. So thank you, Ruben. Always good to hear from you. Says, spot on, fellas. I've been in the traditional Latin Mass with my family for about 2 years now, and I can see the good fruits of it. God bless. That's very kind, Ruben. Thank you so much. That's about the same time span that we've been in the TLM too. So, one thing that's funny is that we are all babies when it comes to this, but obviously we're all growing all in the faith about it. So thank you so much.
I see a lot of people committing to praying for my dad. I appreciate that a lot. That's really awesome. Let's see here.
Do you see there's an Ashley Carlos who said that we had a great show with Catholic Drive Time. Do you know anything about her?
Yeah, who is that? She's kind of cute.
Oh, there's a Genevieve Montgomery. I'll take her if you take the other one.
Let's see here. A lot of really awesome support, and
yeah,
we're just so thankful for you guys. Thank you for engaging with us. And
while we kind of wind down, that's actually just such a good time to really thank. Man, dude, it seems like just the other day. Remember, we were trying just to have 100 people listen to us, and so we are so grateful, really, to so many of you guys. The fact that on YouTube we're here at over 500 subscribers is crazy. I don't think we could have really ever envisioned that. And Rudy and I, we do this because we love Jesus, of course, and we also thought that there's a niche, as we've talked about before, in the market for positive trad content and just kind of refreshing things. We're not name calling. We're just two jabronis with a dream. But we wanted to talk about things that were relevant to us, and also the fact that there's this budding traditional movement, and I think all of us together were changing the face of the stereotype of it, quite frankly. You might have heard comments lately that there is this fiercely traditional American Catholicism that's self-devouring and all this other kind of stuff. And the reality is that this is an international thing, first off. Again, we pointed that out in the Futurist Tradition and plenty of other places. But also, I've just been really kind of meditating on the fact that, trads, real Catholics have been keeping the faith. It's not just purely just trads each and every time, but obviously this is the easiest way to talk about it. But man, dude, we've been kicked around for a hot second for the past 60 years. And it's so crazy that I have even some coworkers, one in particular who talks about having mass, and he's only 10 years older than me. He's just a little older than you, Rudy. But he talks about, having the Latin mass in hotels, motels, right? Father Fryer talks about taking the train 3 hours to get that Latin mass in the barn. And this isn't old history. This isn't from a century or 2 centuries ago. This is, in some cases, a decade, 20 years ago. And so I think that for those who would criticize trads as being mean or fiercely traditional or self-devouring, which is something I'm still trying to figure out, by the way, I'd like to remind you all something that Charles Colomb really pressed upon us, which is that traditional Catholics didn't start this war, quote unquote. And I don't want to characterize it as a war because we're doing this out of the love of Jesus, but they weren't the ones that came and kicked in the doors and took everything that was near and dear to the Catholic faith. And so when you ask why some traditionalists, and I don't think our channel, Rudy, is like this very much. I don't think we're very circle the wagon kind of peoples, but I'm not one, and I know you're not one to criticize some channels and some of our fellow commentators who are a little bit more circle the wagons. Because the fact of the matter is that in some places in the church still, we're getting kicked. We're the dog that keeps getting kicked.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you have to keep that in mind. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, some people have been doing this way longer than we have. Mm-hmm. And, they had their share of kicks to the teeth, so to say. And, some people have chips on their shoulder. I'm not going to criticize them.
Yeah.
I don't think we should.
Not necessarily. I mean, the idea is that, we all have filial corrections that we need to do. We're glad trads. I would highly recommend that everybody in our channel join the Glad Trad Army. We have to figure out a cool name for us, by the way. Something.
Glad Trad Army.
We're gonna have to get Father K to do the voice intro still. But no,
I want you
for the Glad Trad Army, taking back Jerusalem one sub at a time. But no, I just really want to impress upon people that the face of tradition now. It's younger, it's diverse, it's vocal, it's fun, it's kind of rambunctious. It definitely is a meme. It's a meme army, but there's it's not just a fad. And I think that's something that a lot of the hierarchy and our fellows and peers and fellow Catholics are going to start taking note of the more that we kind of get entrenched. Here in Colorado, this is something really cool, Rudy, because I know that this is what the fraternity is gunning for out in St. Vitus. And so I know I can see the strategy. Next year, not this year, unfortunately, but next year, the fraternity out here at Our Lady of Mount Carmel are going to start a school. And they've been talking to the diocese about this for a long time. Well, the diocese, by their own volition, essentially gave them what they wanted to. They were like, how about you guys have a school, and how about it's independent? Like, it's not a diocesan school. So they could kind of wash their hands and let the traditional Catholics do what traditional Catholics do best. And our priests here were like, yeah, can we get that in writing, please? Let's go. Let's run. So there's this, I talk a lot about, Rudy, have you ever read the Benedict option?
No, I've heard of it, but I've never read it.
Okay. Do you know the premise at least?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for any of our viewers who don't know, of course, the Benedict option is about how to be Christian in a post-Christian era, particularly in this country. It's written by a man, I think he's Orthodox, but he talks a lot about how traditional Christianity, really he lumps in Orthodox Catholicism and some like conservative mainline Protestantism into this branch, evangelical Protestantism, some of it. But he talks about how essentially rather than this offensive push all the time, that we need to make like the Benedictines did in the monastic systems and be these hot pocket bastions of civilization. that we maybe need to take a step back and focus on the fundamentals of the faith. And I think that there's time for laughter, Rudy, and a time for war. And so I do think that the church, needs to sit back and do a real serious retrospective. I think that trads, we are doing very good things by insulating ourselves, quote unquote, a little bit around our communities, around our parishes, and just kind of planting our flags, our little Catholic flags all over. And it's from these sort of pockets, these sort of Benedict options, that hopefully we can go and re-evangelize the rest of the culture. We're already seeing great fruits of it. There are plenty of relapsed Catholics, or reverts, I should say. There are plenty of people who are atheists from other religions who are in the Latin Mass, and they're not leaving. They've found faith in Christ, and they would not go anywhere else.
They're home.
They're home. So thank you all so much for watching. If you liked what we had to say, if you want to share it, please, the most important thing you guys can do is continue to keep us in your prayers as we pray for you. The second most important thing you can do is please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It really helps us get our message out. Share this to all the far corners of the earth as you can. After all, isn't it in the scripture, Rudy, that Christ says, go out to all the nations and give them the Glad Trad podcast?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I read that.
Pretty sure I read that, So. Oh, all right, guys, from all of us, both Rudy and I here at the Glad Trad podcast, God bless you and Mary keep you. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.
See ya.